where do we find enthusiastic employees? So let's talk a little bit of the definition and let's talk a little bit of the practice. So when we talk about an enthusiastic workforce, we're talking about those companies who over an extended period of time have not seen their morale dip. We're talking about those companies that have exceptional long-term performance, because we've already established that sustained performance over time is often associated with a high morale workforce, and a high morale workforce is often associated with those companies that are also getting long-term sustainable performance. It's a strong recursive or reciprocal relationship there. What we also find is that there are particular organizational cultures. So if you think about your associations or your client service teams or the different ways that you're engaging with your external partners, there are different cultures that can describe them. We're going to begin to talk about one culture that often creates the conditions where employees can remain enthusiastic, and that's a partnership culture. And partnership has a particular definition, and we'll get into that in just a little bit. And that what we also find is that these companies, so you think client service teams, you think associations, you think companies out in the marketplace, different industry sectors. The big differentiator, right, once you take into account a lot of different things, are the competence of the senior leadership, their business abilities, their acumen, and so forth, but often the culture of the place, the work environment. Why is it the case that I can have two banks on opposite corners that are delivering ostensibly the same products and services with ostensibly the same high-quality workforce, but their stock performance and the work and the experience as a customer can feel so different? Often that's the culture, and it's the leadership and management practices that are being created. And so, you know, these examples are out here to find. And in fact, when I look at my data, about 14% of companies are these enthusiastic environments, these partnership cultures. And we have some examples here. When we talk about the Mayo Clinic, we're talking about an organization that during the last recession was watching their employees take it on the chin, and management decided to forego pay, and they raised pay for the staff because they were struggling. Team-based partnership culture. Costco is constantly berated on Wall Street for pay and benefits. I'm glad President Obama read my book, so he knew the right example to bring during the State of the Union speech. I'm sure that's the order of things. But they're constantly berated for the wages and benefits that they offer, except if you invested in Walmart and invested in Costco, where'd you do better? Did better with Costco. Southwest Airlines doesn't lay off. They would rather take it on the chin than lay off their workforce. And the CEOs have been quoted in various places saying that Nucor Steel does gain sharing with its workforce, gain sharing with steel work, right? With heavy lifting, blue collar jobs. Ritz-Carlton. And how do you get such a high-end customer focus? You can't ask employees to be partners with the customer and then treat them like criminals or adversaries. And so the common characteristics of these organizations is not only that they think about the long-term relationships, but they all give the employees what they need to be successful, which then begs the question, what do employees want? Now, we talk about three basic goals that guide virtually all employees in terms of what they're seeking out of work. And these are three broad goals that have many subcomponents to it. The first is equity, fundamental fairness, both in terms of the way they're being treated relative to the person working next to them, but also relative to what they expect out, right, just in general societal norms. Equity has a psychological, an economic, and a physical component to it. You know, there used to be a time when people went to work and they were worried about coming home, things like safety and so forth. You know, we're also talking about psychological, how people are treated. And economically, we're talking about pay, benefits, and you can put job security in that as well. And when I say pay, I'm talking about a livable wage. Now, Treating people equity creates the willingness to work. It doesn't create the performance, but try getting them to work when they feel fundamentally mistreated. Equity. Achievement. This has a number of components to it. First is to be associated with a company that I can take pride in. Pride is a huge element of what employees are seeking out of work. So they want to be able to connect with a vision, a mission, of values that speak to them. So when you think about your particular situations, have you put something out there, either for the organization as a whole and down in the guts of it, in terms of what I'm doing every day, that I can connect with? And if you've done that, have you enabled them then to be successful on the job? Have you given them the resources, the training, the information, the autonomy, fill in the blank, that they need to get their jobs done? I love companies say, I want to innovate my workforce, and my workforce to be very innovative. I say, let me see your survey data. And they're angry. They say, well, how can you ask your employees to be innovative if they don't even not only have the basics that they need to get their job done, but they're feeling fundamentally mistreated? And so innovation is a luxury that happens afterwards, right? What are the basics? And if I have a strong vision and they're enabled to get the work done, what do I then have to do as well? I have to reward them. Now that reward can be monetary, but it can also be non-monetary. I was doing work on Wall Street as a youngin'. David Sirota sent me in to go talk to the chief operating officer of a very successful bank. And I walk in and I sit down and I'm taking notes. And the CEO walks in, this was in December, and he puts down a check and he walks out. And I look at the check and it's a big check. And as the CEO walks out, he slams his hand down, looks me in the eyes, says, this is exactly what I'm talking about, not even a thank you. You know what I did for this company? Now, try getting away with not giving him the check, right? So we shouldn't pretend that money isn't important. But so is recognition, the financial and the non-financial. Last is camaraderie. Now, camaraderie has sort of two elements to it. One is the work-related and the non-work-related. Most people are social beings, and I say most, about 95% of us. The kinds of things that I'm talking about. There's about 5% of the workforce that'll work no matter what happens, and the 5% that the only way to motivate them is with a baseball bat, right? I'm not talking about either of them. I'm talking about the 90% in the middle. 90% in the middle will come to work each day. They want to be social, right? And that's good. But working together, teamwork, it's not just an issue of camaraderie. It's also an issue of getting the work done, of achievement, right? The whole better than the sum, all that work. How many people work through teams, right? Would you be as successful, right? So teamwork, camaraderie has those two components. And this is what people want out of work. What's interesting is that these goals do not vary. They don't vary by age, by gender, by ethnicity, by job level. They don't vary by the region in the world. And there is absolutely no conflict between these goals and the goals of organizations. In fact, if organizations really consume themselves with just providing employees what they need to have their goals at work satisfied, you would end up with very successful organizations. But still, when we talk about what people want out of work, mythologies and misperceptions abound. How many people not only believe, but hear all the time talking about the differences in generations at work, right? They talk about gender differences, they talk about ethnic differences, all these differences at work. And in fact, in the 25 years that I've been doing this research, I have not found a single instance where the goals differ appreciably between what people want out of work, I'm not talking about what they want to buy, for clothes or music or cars or food or how they want to live their lives. I'm talking about work. I have never seen the difference between men and women, ethnicity, culture, job level, just don't exist. However, I have seen differences in how people experience work. And that's the trick. Management often manages by stereotype. It's one culture for all, not one culture for some. You want a set of leadership and management practices that are consistently applied, because the goals that people have at work are the same. Now, how you meet them may be different. What the CEO considers as fair treatment may be different in how you meet it than the person making $3 a day out in the oil field in Indonesia. But when I went into the oil field in Indonesia and I asked them what they want out of work, you know what they said to me? Sitting in the sun. I said, I want to be able to take care of my family. I want them to treat me respectfully. We were trying to get this oil out of the field. They're not giving us the equipment that we need. I can't find my supervisor. It's all the same stuff. And that's the So let's go back to culture, right? So we've already established that it's good business to try to create a high morale environment. We've already established what the goals of people at work are, and that those goals don't vary. How they experience work may vary. By the way, when you talk about the blocking and tackling of work, the most favorable organizational demographic is Hispanic women. Management, non-management, doesn't matter. Hispanic women. Hispanics in general, Hispanic women. The least favorable organizational demographic is what? Anybody want to guess? Not in this format, Doug. I'm not taking a guess. White males in non-management. Right? However, if you move away from the blocking and tackling of work, sort of how I experience day to day, and you focus on those questions that just deal with issues of fairness at work. Right? You understand the distinction I'm making here? Just issues of fairness at work. The two most disaffected groups are women and blacks. In fact, when you look at women in the workplace, there's usually a benefit for moving into management. Women do not experience that benefit in the same way that men do. In fact, women moving into management, the data suggests they see it almost as another burden to their day, which is horrific, which is terrible. Right? Because the goals of people at work aren't different, but just how they're experiencing work can be very different. And so the culture that you're putting in place matters terribly. So let's talk about the cultures that work and the ones that are less successful. And we're talking about a culture that can simultaneously deliver what the business needs and what the employees need. So what's culture? We can get into all those definitions, and I just love listening to people talk about culture and climate and norms and stereotypes and all this stuff, and it's just makes my head hurt. Culture is the self-fulfilling prophecy of the leaders of the organization, period. So what you're saying, Doug, he said this is exactly what I'm saying, is nothing go on in companies that the senior leadership doesn't allow to have happen. And so the culture of the organization often reflects their beliefs about workers. And there's a couple of different beliefs, right? That we're going to make them, that think of them as dependent, right? Like a parent-child relationship, a high-care environment, but it's also high control, so controlling, they feel like that they're being treated like children, right? The classic paternalistic environment of the 70s. There's also organizations where they show up for work and I paid you, what else do you want? Right? They feel like zeros and nothings. They treat them that way. They're just entries on the spreadsheet. Right? I remember I sit with the CFOs and they put up the spreadsheets and they calculate it out and said, this is what we have to pay them. And it works. Yeah, it works, except your spreadsheet doesn't reflect the people that actually have to take that wage. And so I understand that it works here, but you have to see them as human beings, a transactional environment. Or you see them as adversaries, right, where we battle, constantly battling the workforce, right? And airlines and old school rail are good examples of that just for purposes of time. Or we can treat them as allies in the adventure, true partners, mutual obligations, grounded in performance with shared rewards where there's trust and transparency. When I think about morale is simply that canary in the coal mine. Morale is only important to get a window into how people are experiencing their leadership and management practices. The top part of the chart just gives you the distribution of employees in companies. So about 18% of employees in companies are enthusiastic. Most are merely satisfied, about a quarter are indifferent, and about 1%, now my database is large, so imagine them all in one room, are quite angry. Now, you can take those four different categories, the canary and the coal mine, and you can ask the question, how do those employees feel about different aspects of leadership and management practice, and that's the columns. Enthusiastic employees generally rate 90% positive across these various dimensions of leadership, work environment, job, et cetera, et cetera. And so could you imagine, I mean, look around the room, 90%. So when you walk into companies that are enthusiastic, I mean, this is the level of data that we're dealing with. What happens when I drop off that enthusiasm? What's beginning to suffer first? Right? The first thing that gets in the way is my difficulty in getting the work done, and that relationship that I have with the company about what I expect just in general, right? To be treated a certain way, pay, benefits, job security, have a career, and so on and so forth. What happens next? What falls off? Right? Then I start to, not only am I concerned about those things begin to get negative. What are the only, when I'm looking at the indifferent workforce, what's the saving grace of an indifferent workforce? They would be angry but for manager and teamwork. So when you tell me that management, immediate managers are the cause of poor morale, I'm going to tell you they're the only reason your people are staying. And so when you start thinking about where I should be investing my dollars, the first basic question I want to ask is, so how does that relationship at the team level and with immediate supervisors? Because if that's not so good, things aren't going to be so good. Very powerful. This is millions and millions and millions of employees. It's probably 500 or 600 companies that make the base of this data. So that now we get into, so therefore, what makes a partnership culture? And what makes a partnership culture isn't simply calling them associates or team members, or I can't tell you how many clients I go into, and it's just so many clients, and I go in, how are the employees? And they go, no. We don't call them employees here. We call them team members. I'm like, okay, sorry. And then I'll go out into like a particular auto company I was doing work for, and I go out and I do the focus group, and I go, so how does it feel to be team? And then they start. And then they start. And then they start yelling. And so I'm not talking about words on the wall. I'm talking about what are the specific attributes. Well, one of the key things about a partnership culture is that the coin of the realm there is performance. That's what wins the day. As opposed to loyalty in a paternalistic environment. I can't believe you took that position in that meeting. You undercut me. Yeah, you were wrong. But how many environments, how many people here have worked in other places? So am I speaking the gospel or what? Right? Loyalty-based, power-based. money cultures or performance-oriented environments, which often go hand in hand with customer-facing environments, right? You have money cultures that look a particular way. You have customer cultures, client-facing cultures that look a particular way. A partnership culture, the coin of the realm is performance, mutual obligation grounded in performance, now I can't speak, with shared rewards. What are some of the things that these organizations do? If you actually go into a partnership environment, what are the kinds of things that you often find? These are the kinds of things that you often find. The Mayo Clinic is different from Southwest Airlines. I'm not saying better or worse. The Mayo Clinic has let people go in the past. Southwest hasn't. But at the Mayo Clinic, if they're going to do downsizing, those employees know that there are a certain set of activities that are going to take place first. They can bank on it. And that cutting people is the last thing that they'll do. During the recession in '01, we were doing work for Barron's, and they were in a hard way. And I was sitting in the office of the CEO, and we were having a discussion about how, they were going to approach things. And, they were coming up a shortfall. And, one of the plans out there was they were going to reduce in the plant about 150 jobs. And what the CEO said at that point is, we are not going to cut people, we're going to cut paper. And I went, yeah, what does that mean? And in fact, I don't know if you've ever, read Barron's, but, they have all those tables of the stock quotes, right? Well, not everybody reads all those stocks. They know the ones that are being tracked. What they did is they came up with a slimline version of it, cut the size of the paper, saved money, saved the jobs. And so those employees knew that if they were going to lose jobs, it was going to be the last thing that had to be done. And there's a whole host of other things about gain sharing and teamwork and dealing with poor performers. Employees want to be told if they're not doing work, because otherwise they think you don't care about them. Right? And so there's a number of different practices that we find consistently across organizations that are engaged in a partnership environment with their employees, because they know that there's no BS in the environment. It's not about loyalty, it's not about who can make the most money, it's not about politics, although these places aren't nirvana either. But it's about performance, and so if you're sitting down and talking to me, it's not personal.